What you call being late is actually you learning the rhythm of your own path, and that changes everything. You've been told there's a timeline, a schedule carved into existence that everyone else seems to follow with ease. By this age, you should have this. By that milestone, you should be there. And when you look around and see others moving forward while you feel stuck, something inside you whispers, "I'm falling behind." But what if that whisper is a lie? What if the pressure to move faster, achieve sooner, prove yourself quicker is the very thing keeping you from the life you're meant to live? This video isn't about motivation. It's not about pushing harder or finding some hidden strategy to speed up your progress. It's about something deeper, the realization that your path has its own tempo, and the moment you stop fighting it is the moment real transformation begins. You're not late. You're learning. There's a weight you carry that has no name. It doesn't live in your muscles or bones. It lives in the space between who you are and who you think you should be. This is the invisible weight of comparison, and it grows heavier the longer you pretend it isn't there. Eastern philosophy calls it the beginning of suffering, the moment you measure your inner world against someone else's outer one. You see their light and assume your shadow is a flaw. But shadow work begins here, in this quiet ache, where self-awareness is born not from clarity, but from exhaustion. The mirror doesn't lie, it simply reflects what you've been avoiding. Comparison isn't just about envy or ambition. It's deeper than that. It's the psychology of pain dressed in the language of progress. You scroll, you watch, you absorb the lives of others as if they were maps to your own worth. And somewhere along the way, you forget that the river doesn't compare itself to the ocean. It simply flows. Yet you stand still, frozen by the illusion that everyone else has found the rhythm while you're still searching for the beat. This is where emotional pain begins, not in failure, but in the belief that you're failing while others are not. The wound isn't visible, but it's real. The ego loves comparison because it thrives on division. It needs to measure, to rank, to place you somewhere on a scale that doesn't even exist. In Taoism, this is called losing the way the moment you abandon Wu Wei, the effortless flow of your own path to chase someone else's. You start believing that success has a timeline, that growth has milestones, and that if you're not there yet, you're somehow behind. But what if there is no there? What if the only race you're running is the one your mind invented? Ego dissolution starts when you realize this. The person you're competing with is a ghost. Let's say you're watching someone build something you wish you'd started. Maybe it's a business, a body, a relationship, a creative project. You feel that familiar tightness in your chest, the one that says, "I should be further along." This is suffering and awakening holding hands. Because in that moment, you're not really looking at them. You're looking at your own reflection, distorted by fear. The Buddhist concept of samsara, the cycle of craving and dissatisfaction, plays out right here. You crave their position, their peace, their progress. But craving is just attachment wearing a different mask. And attachment to an image of who you should be is the heaviest chain of all. So you carry it. Day after day, this invisible weight presses down. You tell yourself it's motivation, but it doesn't feel like fuel, it feels like friction. Inner stillness becomes impossible because your mind is always elsewhere, always comparing, always calculating the gap between here and there. And yet, something shifts when you stop resisting the weight. When you stop pretending it isn't crushing you. Because the moment you acknowledge the pressure is the moment you start to understand it. And understanding is the first crack in the armor, the first breath before the storm. The illusion whispers constantly. It tells you there's a schedule you're supposed to follow, a timeline carved into the fabric of existence that everyone else seems to know by heart. You're supposed to have achieved certain things by certain ages, reached certain milestones before the clock runs out. This belief feels so real that you forget it's just that a belief, not truth, not law. Just a story you've been told so many times it became your religion. In Zen philosophy, this is called mistaking the finger for the moon. The timeline is the finger, pointing, but you've been staring at it so long you forgot to look at what it's pointing toward. Your actual life, unfolding in its own tempo. Being behind is a concept that only exists in comparison. It requires you to measure your journey against someone else's, to assume that life is a straight path with clear markers and universal checkpoints. But the Tao teaches something different, that the way is not a road at all. It's a river, and every river finds the ocean in its own time. Some rush through valleys, others win through mountains. Some are wide and calm, others narrow and wild. None of them are wrong. None of them are late. Yet you stand on the bank, watching others flow past, convinced you've somehow missed the current. This is the psychology of pain disguised as logic. Your mind creates a phantom race. It invents competitors, imagines finish lines, and measures progress by standards that were never yours to begin with. You see someone your age with a career you admire, a relationship you long for, a sense of peace you can't access, and something inside you collapses. I should be there by now, you think. But where is there? And who decided when you should arrive? These questions rarely surface because the ego prefers the suffering of certainty to the freedom of uncertainty. It would rather believe you're behind than admit there's no race at all. Shadow work means looking at this need to be ahead, to be on time, and asking, whose clock am I following? Consider this. If you met someone who had everything you think you should have by now, the success, the stability, the clarity, and they told you they felt empty, would you still want their timeline? This happens more than you'd think. People reach the milestones and discover the promised fulfillment was a mirage. Because self-awareness doesn't come from achieving, it comes from questioning why you needed to achieve in the first place. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence applies here. Everything you think you're behind on will eventually change, dissolve, or transform into something else. The career will shift. The relationship will evolve. The body will age. The only constant is the now, and in the now, you are exactly where you are, not behind, not ahead, here, but the illusion is sticky. It clings to you like smoke, clouding your vision even when you think you've cleared it. You'll have moments of clarity, brief flashes where you see through the timeline myth, and then the world will show you another person's success and the weight will return. This is the cycle. This is samsara, the wheel of craving and comparing, spinning endlessly until you choose to step off. And stepping off doesn't mean giving up on growth or ambition. It means recognizing that your path has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own lessons. The sword must be forged in its own fire, not someone else's. And the temple isn't built in a day, but in the space between breaths where patience becomes power. The ego doesn't like waiting. It wants proof, validation, evidence that the effort is working, and it wants it now. This impatience isn't just restlessness. It's a form of control. The mind believes that if it pushes hard enough, forces enough, demands enough, reality will bend to its timeline. But Eastern philosophy teaches the opposite, that force creates resistance, and resistance creates suffering. Wu Wei, the art of effortless action, is lost the moment you grab too tightly. The river doesn't rush to the ocean because it's impatient. It flows because that's its nature. But you're standing in the current, shoving water forward with your hands, wondering why you're exhausted. Quick results feel like safety. If you can see progress immediately, you can prove to yourself and to others that you're moving in the right direction. This need for instant feedback is where emotional pain hides. Because when the results don't come fast enough, you interpret it as failure. You think, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should quit and try something else. The ego craves certainty. And when transformation takes longer than expected, it starts to panic. But spiritual transformation has never been quick. Ego dissolution doesn't happen in a weekend workshop or a 30-day challenge. It happens in the slow, uncomfortable unraveling of everything you thought you knew about yourself. Let's say you start meditating. You sit down, close your eyes, and expect inner stillness to arrive like a package at your door. But instead, your mind is louder than ever. Thoughts swarm like bees. Your body won't settle. And after 10 minutes, you're convinced meditation doesn't work for you. This is the impatient ego talking. It expected enlightenment through pain to feel like relief, not like wrestling with your own chaos. But mindfulness isn't about silencing the mind, it's about watching it without needing to control it. The practice isn't working when you feel calm. It's working when you notice the impatience itself. When you see the demand for quick results as just another thought passing through like wind through an empty room. The world feeds this hunger. Everything around you promises speed, fast success, rapid transformation, instant clarity. You're told you can heal trauma in 6 steps, master a skill in 21 days, or unlock your full potential with one morning routine. And maybe some of these things help. But they also create an expectation that deep work should feel easy, that real change should be visible and immediate. Karma and rebirth in the Buddhist sense aren't about literal reincarnation, they're about how. Patterns repeat until you learn the lesson. And the lesson here is this: growth doesn't owe you a timeline. The seed doesn't apologize for taking time to become a tree. It simply grows, whether you're watching or not. So the ego keeps demanding. It checks the mirror every day for signs of change. It measures progress in metrics that don't capture the depth of what's actually shifting beneath the surface. And when the outer world doesn't reflect the inner work fast enough, frustration sets in. This is where many people quit, not because the path isn't working, but because the ego couldn't tolerate not knowing when it would work. Non-attachment means letting go of the need to see the outcome before you've walked the road. It means trusting the process even when the process feels like nothing is happening. Because something is always happening. Even in the silence between storms, something is being carved into shape. There's a war happening inside you. On one side, the world with its deadlines, expectations, and milestones. On the other, something quieter, something that doesn't speak in years or goals, but in readiness and ripeness, in the slow unfolding of what's meant to emerge. This is the tension between outer timelines and the soul's timing, and it's one of the deepest sources of suffering and awakening. Society tells you when you should be settled, successful, certain, but the soul doesn't care about society's calendar. It moves like seasons, sometimes blooming, sometimes dormant, always following a rhythm that refuses to be rushed. And when these two timelines collide, you feel it in your bones. The outer world operates on logic and linear progression. Finish school by this age. Start a career by that age. Build something tangible, something you can show, something that proves you're on track. These aren't just suggestions, they feel like commandments. And if you deviate, If you take longer, if your path winds through detours and pauses, the world reminds you. Friends ask when you'll settle down. Family questions your choices. Strangers measure your worth by what you've accumulated. This is the mind-body connection at war with itself. Your mind absorbs the pressure, believes the timeline, and pushes forward. But your body, your soul, resists. It knows something your mind has forgotten, that real transformation doesn't fit into a 5-year plan. Eastern philosophy speaks of right timing, not forced timing. In Taoism, there's a concept that translates roughly to waiting for the right moment, not passive waiting, but active readiness. The archer doesn't release the arrow before the breath is steady. The farmer doesn't plant seeds in frozen ground. Everything has its season, and trying to skip ahead only creates suffering. Yet you've been conditioned to believe that waiting is weakness, that patience is procrastination, that if you're not moving fast, you're falling behind. So you push, you force. You ignore the quiet voice inside that says, "Not yet." And in that pushing, you lose touch with your own inner stillness, your own sense of what's actually ready to unfold. Consider someone who spends years in a career that doesn't fit, not because they love it, but because it's on schedule. They hit the milestones, promotions, raises, recognition, but inside something withers. They tell themselves they're being responsible, practical, mature. But what they're really doing is honoring an outer timeline while suffocating the souls. Then one day, something breaks. Maybe it's burnout. Maybe it's a crisis. Maybe it's just a moment of devastating clarity where they realize they've been living someone else's life. This is shadow work in action. The breaking isn't a failure, it's the soul finally demanding to be heard. And the pain that comes with it? That's not punishment. That's the signal that you've been out of sync for too long. The tension doesn't resolve by choosing one timeline over the other. It resolves by learning to hold both without letting either one dominate. Yes, you live in a world with structure, with responsibilities, with clocks and calendars. But you also live in a body with its own intelligence, its own knowing, its own tempo. Spiritual transformation asks you to honor both, to show up in the world while staying rooted in your own truth, to act with intention while remaining unattached to when the results will come. This is where detachment becomes freedom, not detachment from the world, but from the need to control when and how your life unfolds, because the soul doesn't wear a watch. And the more you try to force its timing, the further you drift from the path. There's a specific kind of ache that comes from standing still while the world around you seems to sprint forward. You see people, friends, peers, strangers on a screen achieving, building, with momentum. And you? You feel like you're wading through mud, every step heavy, every breath laced with the question, why not me? This isn't jealousy in the simple sense. It's deeper. It's the psychology of pain meeting the illusion of separation. You watch others move and you forget that their journey has nothing to do with yours. You forget that the river beside you isn't competing with your river. But the mind doesn't care about rivers or philosophy when it's drowning in comparison. It only knows the weight of feeling left behind. This pain is layered. On the surface, it looks like frustration or impatience, but beneath that, there's fear. Fear that maybe you're not capable. Fear that you missed your chance. Fear that the universe handed out invitations to forward movement and somehow skipped you. Emotional pain thrives in this space because it feeds on the story that you're broken, stuck, or fundamentally different from those who seem to flow with ease. But Eastern philosophy would ask, what if being stuck is just another form of movement? What if stillness isn't the opposite of progress, but a necessary part of it. The seed doesn't move. It sits in the dark soil, invisible, doing work no one can see. And then, when the timing is right, it breaks open. You scroll through lives that look complete. Highlight reels of success, love, clarity, purpose. And with each post, each update, each celebration, the gap between their world and yours widens. You start to believe that everyone has figured out something you haven't, that there's a secret, a key, a method you're missing. This is where self-awareness becomes painful, because when you're honest, you realize the real problem isn't that they're moving forward. It's that you've tied your worth to movement itself. You've made motion the measure of value. And when you're not visibly progressing, you feel invisible, unseen, forgotten. But shadow work whispers a different truth. Maybe what you're experiencing isn't stagnation. Maybe it's gestation. Think about someone training for a marathon. For months, they run the same routes, push through the same exhaustion, see no visible difference in their time or their body. Then, suddenly, everything clicks. The pace improves. The endurance expands. What changed? Not the effort. The effort was always there. What changed was the accumulation of invisible work finally becoming visible. This is karma and rebirth in motion, not past lives, but past efforts ripening into present reality. You're not stuck. You're in the part of the process where nothing looks like it's happening. And that's the part most people quit, because the ego can't tolerate not seeing proof. It needs the medal, the applause, the confirmation. But the soul knows how to wait in the dark. And still, the pain persists. You watch them move. You feel yourself frozen. And somewhere inside, a voice says, "What's wrong with me?" But nothing is wrong. You're not broken. You're not cursed. You're not being left behind by some cosmic conspiracy. You're simply in a different chapter. A chapter where the work is internal, invisible, unglamorous. A chapter where transformation happens not in the doing, but in the undoing. Where ego dissolution strips away the need to perform, to prove, to keep pace with anyone other than yourself. The others will keep moving. Let them. Their path was never meant to be yours, and yours is unfolding in ways you can't yet see. When you can't tolerate the slowness anymore, something inside you snaps. Not dramatically, quietly. You stop trusting the process and start forcing outcomes. You push harder, work longer, demand more from yourself than you have to give. And in that desperation to move forward, you create the very obstacles you're trying to avoid. This is self-sabotage, and it doesn't look like laziness or procrastination. It looks like overcommitment, burnout, and decisions made from panic instead of presence. Eastern philosophy warns against this. When you act from imbalance, you create more imbalance. When you abandon Wu Wei, the effortless flow, you turn your life into a battle against yourself. And battles like that, nobody wins. Rushing feels productive. It feels like you're finally taking control, making things happen, refusing to be passive. But beneath the surface, it's fear driving the car. Fear that if you don't force it now, it'll never come. Fear that patience is just another word for failure. So you skip steps. You ignore the signals from your body telling you to slow down. You override your intuition because it's not moving fast enough. This is where the mind-body connection fractures. Your mind races ahead, making plans and setting goals, while your body lags behind, exhausted and ignored. And when the body finally collapses through illness, injury, or sheer depletion, you call it bad luck. But it's not luck, it's consequence. the result of living out of sync with your own rhythm. Let's say you're building something, a project, a skill, a new version of yourself. You're impatient for results, so you start cutting corners. You work through rest days. You skip the foundational steps because they feel too slow. You tell yourself you'll fix it later, that momentum matters more than method. And for a while, it looks like it's working. You're moving fast, checking boxes, covering ground. But then something breaks. Maybe it's the project itself, sloppy, unstable, built on a weak foundation. Maybe it's you, exhausted, resentful, disconnected from why you started in the first place. This is samsara, the cycle of craving and dissatisfaction playing out in real time. You rushed toward the result and lost the essence along the way. Self-sabotage also shows up in subtler ways. You start something with excitement, but when it doesn't pay off quickly, you quit and jump to the next thing. Or you stay but stop believing in it, going through the motions without presence, without care. Or you convince yourself you're not ready, that you need more preparation, more knowledge, more certainty before you can truly commit. All of this, the quitting, the staying hollow, the endless delaying, comes from the same root. Impatience disguised as strategy. The ego hates the middle part of the journey. It loves beginnings and endings, but the messy middle? That's where spiritual transformation actually happens. And if you rush through it, you miss the entire point. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment to outcomes, to timelines, to the idea that life should look a certain way by now. And when life doesn't comply, when your efforts don't produce immediate results, attachment turns into force. You try to control what can't be controlled. You grip tighter when you should be letting go. And in that gripping, you strangle the very thing you're trying to nurture. The seed crushed by impatient hands never becomes a tree. The lesson here isn't to stop trying. It's to stop rushing. To recognize that real growth has its own tempo, and when you honor that tempo instead of fighting it, something shifts. Not overnight, not in a flash, but slowly, steadily. Like roots deepening beneath the surface where no one can see. There's a moment when the fight finally exhausts itself, when the pushing, the rushing, the constant grasping for forward movement drains every ounce of energy you have left. And in that emptiness, something unexpected happens. Not a collapse, though it feels like one at first, but a kind of opening. A space where you stop trying to control the rhythm and simply listen. This is when the inner rhythm reveals itself. Not because you earned it or figured it out, but because you finally got quiet enough to hear what was always there. Eastern philosophy calls this returning to your original nature, the part of you that exists before all the noise, before all the stories about who you should be and when you should arrive. The inner rhythm doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with instructions or guarantees. It's more like a pulse you feel when you stop shouting over it. You notice it in small things first, a sense of knowing when to rest without guilt, when to move without force, when to wait without anxiety. This is mindfulness in its truest form, not as a technique but as a way of being. You start to recognize that your body has always known the right pace, but your mind kept overriding it with deadlines and comparisons. Self-awareness deepens here, not through analysis but through presence. You realize that all the rushing wasn't about progress, it was about avoiding the discomfort of not knowing. And now, in this stillness, you're learning to sit with the not knowing without needing to fix it. Wu Wei begins to make sense now. Effortless action isn't about doing nothing, it's about doing what aligns with your natural flow instead of forcing what doesn't. Think of a musician learning to improvise. At first, They overthink every note, trying to control the sound, make it perfect, prove their skill. But the real music only comes when they stop trying and start feeling. When they let their hands move with the rhythm instead of against it. This is what happens when you stop forcing progress. You don't become passive. You become attuned. You act, but from a place of inner stillness rather than outer pressure. And the actions that come from this place, they're more effective, more authentic, more sustainable than anything you forced into existence. Let's say you've been struggling with a decision, career, relationship, creative direction. You've made pros and cons lists, sought advice, analyzed every angle, but clarity hasn't come. Then one day, after weeks of not thinking about it, the answer simply appears. Not as a loud revelation, but as a quiet certainty. This is the soul's timing at work. This is what happens when you stop demanding answers and create space for them to arrive. The Tao teaches that the way reveals itself to those who stop looking for it with clenched fists. You can't force wisdom. You can't rush insight. You can only prepare the ground and trust that when the soil is ready, something will grow. And it will grow at its own pace, in its own season, regardless of how much you wish it would hurry. The paradox is this: the moment you stop chasing progress is often the moment real progress begins. Not the kind you can measure or post or prove, but the kind that changes you from the inside out. Ego dissolution happens here, in this space where you're no longer performing for an invisible audience, no longer racing against a phantom clock. You're simply living your life, breath by breath, choice by choice, trusting that your inner rhythm knows where you're going even when your mind doesn't. And that trust, that willingness to move with the current instead of against it, becomes the foundation for everything that comes next, including the parts you never saw coming. The realization doesn't hit you like lightning. It seeps in slowly like water finding cracks in stone. Every path has its own tempo, not just as a concept, but as a lived truth. You start to see it everywhere in nature, in others, in your own history. The oak tree that takes decades to tower over the forest. The wildflower that blooms and fades in a single season. Neither is better. Neither is behind. They're simply following their own design, their own inner blueprint. And somewhere in that observation, you stop measuring your journey against anyone else's. This is where suffering and awakening meet at the crossroads. The suffering was in believing there was one right speed. The awakening is in realizing there never was. Eastern philosophy has always known this. The Buddhist teaching of impermanence reminds you that everything is in flux, always changing, never static. What looks like stagnation today might be preparation for tomorrow's breakthrough. What feels like rapid progress now might slow to a crawl next month. The rhythm isn't linear. It's cyclical, seasonal, alive. And when you finally accept that your path moves at its own tempo, not faster, not slower, just different, something inside you relaxes. The tension you've been holding, the constant vigilance against falling behind, begins to dissolve. Not because you've given up, but because you finally understood. Your worth was never tied to your speed. This insight changes how you see others. You stop envying their pace because you recognize they're walking a completely different road. Their timing has nothing to do with yours. Their milestones don't invalidate your own. In fact, the comparison itself becomes absurd once you see clearly. It's like comparing a river to a mountain and asking which one is doing a better job. The question makes no sense. Each has its purpose, its process, its own way of existing in the world. Shadow work led you here to this place where you can witness another person's success without feeling diminished by it, where you can celebrate their wins without it meaning anything about your losses, because there are no losses, only different chapters unfolding at different speeds. Imagine a gardener tending multiple plants. Some sprout within days. Others take weeks to show even a hint of green. The gardener doesn't panic, doesn't assume the slow ones are broken, doesn't force the soil open to check on the roots. The gardener simply waters, waits, and trusts that each seed knows its own timing. This is how you begin to relate to yourself, with patience, with trust, with the understanding that growth happens whether you're watching or not. Karma and rebirth make sense here too, not as mystical concepts, but as the recognition that every action, every effort, every moment of showing up is planting something. And those seeds will sprout when they're ready, not when you demand it. The insight settles into your bones. You stop asking, "Why am I not there yet?" and start asking, "What is this moment teaching me?" You stop looking ahead with anxiety and start looking around with curiosity. The path becomes less about reaching a destination and more about walking with awareness. This is spiritual transformation stripped of all the mysticism, just you. Finally at peace with your own rhythm, finally trusting that the tempo you're moving at is exactly the one you need. And once that trust takes root, everything else begins to shift in ways you never could have forced. So here's the question that matters. Are you still measuring your life by someone else's clock, or have you finally started listening to your own rhythm? The world will keep moving. Others will keep progressing at their pace. And you? You'll keep walking yours, not behind, not ahead, just yours. This isn't about giving up on ambition or settling for less. It's about recognizing that the most profound growth happens when you stop forcing it, when you trust the tempo instead of fighting it, when you realize that being late was never the problem, it was believing you were supposed to arrive at the same time as everyone else. If this video spoke to something inside you, don't let it fade. Stay with it. Sit with it. Let it settle into the places where you've been holding tension, where you've been gripping too tightly, where you've been convincing yourself that slower means lesser. It doesn't. The path you're on is yours alone, and it's unfolding exactly as it should. And if you're ready to go deeper, if you're ready to understand what all this rushing has been protecting you from, watch this next. Healing is not about forgetting. It's about embracing what hurt. Keep walking. The next lesson awaits you.